Good evening, members and officers of the Council and members of the press and public. I welcome you to the meeting of the Council this evening. Housekeeping. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security or opposite in the lifts. In the foyer, please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. I can confirm that the proceedings of this meeting will be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. I would advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Does anyone intend to film the meeting this evening? Thank you. In that case, if any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. Any filming or recording will not be permitted for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. Can I ask everyone present to please ensure that their mobile phones are turned silent and that they are not used to make or receive calls in the chamber whilst the meeting is in progress. We can now move on to the agenda proper, and the agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillors Constantine and Dixon. Are there any other apologies for the meeting this evening? Councillor Fairbrass. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th February 2019. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 28th of February 2019 be approved and signed as a correct record. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
I second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. Agenda item 3, announcements. I have not been informed of any announcements for this evening. So agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Campbell.
Apart from the councillor allowance scheme, I think we're all interested there, aren't we? Or disinterested, whichever one it is.
Do you want to pass across to the chairman?
I'll pass across to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, all members have a general dispensation in place regarding matters relating to members' allowances.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, petitions. 2 petitions have been received in accordance with Council Procedure number 12. Would members please note that the first petition, agenda item 5A, regarding modern-day slavery, has been withdrawn at the request of the petition organiser. So we can move on to agenda item 5B, petition regarding the budget. An e-petition containing 37 valid signatures has been received by the Council. I'm pleased to welcome Mr Finnegan to the meeting. Could you please make your way to the top table? Not here. Not here. So I can move on. In accordance with the Council's petition scheme, the petition will be referred to Cabinet without debate for a report to the Council within 3 ordinary meetings. Agenda item 6, questions from the press and public. 1 question has been received from a member of the public in accordance with Council Procedure Rule number 13. Please note that only the questioner and respondent are permitted to speak on the question, and that if the questioner is not present at this meeting, their question cannot be put but will be replied to in writing. Could the questioner please only state the name of the Cabinet member to whom their question is to be put, and read out the exact wording of the question that they submitted to the Council. So agenda item 6A, question from a member of the public regarding clean streets and highways. Would members please refer to supplementary agenda 1? And I am pleased to welcome Mr. Wise to the meeting. Could you please make your way to the top table, please, Mr. Wise?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is addressed to Councillor Savage, Cabinet Member for Operational Services. Question is, the basic competence of a council can be measured in its ability to keep streets and highways free from litter and other detritus. To its shame, Thanet Council fails spectacularly in this regard and shames us all. What are you going to do about it? Residents and visitors deserve better.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. I call upon Councillor Savage to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted, in actual fact, to receive this question and to answer it, Chairman. I am approaching the end of my short tenure as portfolio holder of operational services, and this question enables me to give Council something of a report of the issues and problems that I have faced in my time here. It is with sadness I must report the following enforcement actions over the last year. This Council has issued the following penalties to deal with litter and rubbish offences. 69 fixed penalty notices of £400 for fly tipping and dumping. The successful prosecution of over 25 people in the Magistrates' Court. There have been a further 67 prosecutions in the Magistrates' Court for non-payment of fixed penalty notices. Furthermore, this Council Enforcement Services has issued the following enforcement notices to deal with litter and rubbish offences. 190 pest damage by rubbish notices. No less than 772 Environmental Protection Act Section 46 notices. 60 commercial trade waste notices, 107 community protection warnings for litter and waste offences, 20 community protection notices with £100 fines for litter and waste offences, and finally, this Council has undertaken no less than, and I say this twice, 3,755 enforcement litter and waste investigations. Now to performance. Over the last 12 months, our clearing teams have collected 900 tonnes from public litter bins, collected 840 tonnes of street sweepings, collected over 100 tonnes of fly tippings, and finally collected no less than 3,500 tonnes of litter from our beaches. Now to improvement. For litter collection in 2017, performance stood at 17% of streets with litter at an unacceptable level. In 2019, our performance is now at 10%. With respect to detritus, which Mr. Wise specifically mentions, in 2017, performance was 21.9% of streets with an unacceptable level. Now, in 2019, performance is now at 5.1%, lower than our target of 7%. It is getting dark out there now, and from my experience over the last 6 months, someone somewhere is about to chuck a bag of mixed rubbish out into the street. Elsewhere, someone is going to leave a mattress propped up against a wall. An old sofa has suddenly materialised on a grass verge. Someone driving on the St. Peter's Road at speed is about to empty the litter in their car out of the window. Personal experience. I've witnessed it. And tomorrow morning, I'll get the email complaints. When is this Council going to clear up? I'm afraid the facts are there and the conclusion is obvious. I'll tell you what is shameful, Mr. Wise, the fact that we have visitors and some of our own residents who litter and fly tip our streets. The fact we have had to impose so many fines and prosecutions of some of our own residents and visitors. That is the true shame, Mr. Wise. I'm going to take a step further now of praising the efforts of our frontline staff who have to deal on a daily basis with a continuous onslaught of mindless littering and fly tipping, of congratulating the managers for motivating the staff and for spearheading action. Finally, of considering it a privilege to have worked with senior officers to do all that can be done with the resources at our disposal for the benefit of our residents. In conclusion, what I find very sad is I feel this question is an attempt to discredit the work of this council. The opportunity of a question to council should not be used to castigate the cabinet member, officers and frontline staff. On behalf of our hard-working staff, I strongly refute this question's intrinsic accusation. And in closing, and with your permission, Chairman, I would like a round of applause for our frontline staff. Group, please, could you support me in that? And all councillors, could we have a round of applause for our frontline staff, please? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Savage, and just within the 3 minutes. And thank you, Mr. Wise. Agenda item 7, questions from members of the council. One question has been received from members of the council. Agenda item 7A, question number 1 from a member regarding the funding of tourism services. I call upon Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was considering withdrawing this question, but this evening I received a substantial petition from residents, particularly in the Margate area, so I will continue with my question if I may. My question is this. Tourism is one of the most important wealth and well-being generators in Thanet. Could the Cabinet member confirm she is persuading colleagues to reverse the allocation of £3 million to this building and using some of the monies to save our vital tourism staff and services? Transformation money can be used in this way. Thank you.
I call upon the leader to respond. Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your question, Councillor Johnson. I'm not Councillor Ashby, but... Okay, I took it more that it was to do with budget allocation, so I've taken it on. I've got to say that I was quite surprised, really, to see that after 24 years on this council, you don't seem to appreciate the difference between revenue spend and capital expenditure. It does, however, give me the opportunity to elaborate on why we have made a provision of £3 million for office accommodation. Thanet District Council main offices were built in the 1970s, and almost 50 years on, the structure and services within the building are starting to show signs of deterioration. Continuing to put off addressing the issues with the building will inevitably lead to even greater costs further down the line. And I think it's worth pointing out that council staff numbers have virtually halved in that time period. This provision of £3 million indicated in the budget is just that. It's a provision, rather than a confirmed total spend at this stage. We want to look at a range of potential decisions regarding the office building, and this will include undertaking a full independent assessment of the most pragmatic options available to the council. This could mean moving to a smaller space, refurbishing the existing space, or a combination of the two. I think what's missing from the published information is the fact that if we refurbish this building, the running costs would be reduced and surplus space could be let, bringing in additional income. If the council were to move, there would clearly be a capital receipt to offset the cost of the new accommodation. So to answer your question, Councillor Johnson, no one is looking to reverse this decision, and even if they were, monies could not be redirected to meet service costs.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Councillor Johnson, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, I do. And I know that Councillor Bayford's been in here even longer than myself, and he must know that a Conservative government has actually allowed us to use capital for transformation, and there would be ways around this, and I have spoken to officers within this council. I'm surprised you haven't done likewise. It was a Conservative government that gave us that allowance. However, my further question really is on this. We have a duty of care to all of our staff, and I understand that 7 of our highly valued tourism staff are at risk of losing their jobs. I would ask, as part of a duty of care of every councillor in here to every member of staff, that we actually revisit this. We cannot replace valued paid staff with volunteers. The tourism staff do an amazing job. They advise on coastal safety. They talk and speak to, I gather, nearly 99,000 people in the last year, 82,000 that have been footfall into the Droit House and the tourism points. So I'm asking, please, what effort has been made to redeploy those 7 staff that I'm talking about, that we all, every one of us, have a duty of care to? We have a duty of care when people are reported to standards who have upset staff. We have a duty of care to staff who are also at a lower employment level. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I don't personally feel it's appropriate for the leader to respond, but he's ready to respond if you'd like, Councillor Bayford. These are staff matters, and I'm not sure that we should be discussing them in open forum.
No, I won't talk about staff matters, but I would like to say that tourism is an integral part of our ongoing success as a destination. We're currently in the process of reviewing how we will continue to deliver this in the future to ensure that this remains a successful part of our local economy. This is in the wider context of the Council facing serious financial pressures. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Agenda item 8, motions of notice. No motions of notice have been received in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 3. So, agenda item 9, Leader's Report. I call upon the Leader.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure that everyone is aware of the plan to use Manston as a lorry park for up to 6,500 trucks in the event of a build-up of traffic due to delays at Dover over post-Brexit, whenever post-Brexit, or if post-Brexit, or whatever Brexit may be. This would be in conjunction with the deployment of Operation Brock on the M20. Brock would facilitate around 2,000 vehicles crawling towards Dover, with any excess traffic being diverted to Manston to be held prior to being drip-fed to Dover along the A256. I have a great concern that this could lead to Thanet being effectively cut off from the rest of Kent, a situation which would be exacerbated in the event of accidents or breakdowns on the A256, and a failure of enforcement which could mean that HGVs find themselves in appropriate places, adding to the chaos. I and the senior management team believe that this scheme is ill-conceived and will lead to considerable disruption for the residents of Thanet. We feel that there was some logic when consideration was being given to using Ramsgate as a port of exit, but that it doesn't work just as a facility for the Port of Dover. TDC does not support Operation Brock, but despite this, your officers are working with partner agencies to ensure that, should Manston be called into use, the situation will be managed as effectively as possible to reduce the impact on the local community. It should be borne in mind that the situation is intended to be temporary and any inconvenience should be short-lived. We'll wait and see. I'm pleased to report that TDC is sending an expression of interest in a share of the Future High Streets Fund, which will provide co-funding towards capital projects that could bring about transformational change to a town centre. As each council could put forward just one request, we were in the invidious position of having to choose which of our high streets should go forward. To this end, a cross-party, cross-town working party was set up to decide which ones should be supported. In the end, it was a close call between Margate and Ramsgate, with Ramsgate being the final choice. Ramsgate has seen little investment in recent years and has repeatedly suffered failed or stalled developments. The town has a significant case to make in terms of its social and economic needs, as well as its physical regeneration needs. The scale of need and opportunity to deliver change was compared across the 3 main towns, and Ramsgate was identified as having the most potential. I have to say that Margate was a close second, and should the Ramsgate bid be unsuccessful, will be the subject of an application in a future second round of bidding. Whilst on the topic of funding, we've received 2 payments from the government towards the cost incurred as a result of Brexit. One of £35,000, which was given to all district councils, and another of £136,000, which was given to any district with a port. We've also been successful in a bid to the Coastal Revival Fund for £44,000 to commission a feasibility and options study in respect of the Lido and Clifton Baths site. This could provide the public with an opportunity to access this iconic Margate location for the first time in over 40 years. A very pleasing aspect of this bid was the way the local community organisations and businesses enthusiastically gave their support, and I'm sure this contributed to its success. Councillor Savage's earlier answer covered many points about litter, but I want to point out that businesses that use public litter bins or fly tip their commercial waste are actually breaking the law. This contributes to overflowing litter bins and creates litter across our streets and open spaces. Most businesses comply with the law, but TDC has recently sent notices to 90 businesses who presently fail to comply. As a result, they're now planning to dispose of their waste correctly and have trade waste agreements in place. Our enforcement teams have been visiting businesses to ensure that they have agreements in place. This council, as has been said by Councillor Savage, is often criticised over the state of some of its streets. But again, as he said, it's the public who create the mess, and in some areas, keeping them clean is an uphill battle. It must be extremely dispiriting to staff that there is rarely any praise given for the many areas that are always kept clean and rubbish-free, and there are a lot of them in the district. I can also announce that we've introduced a rogue landlord scheme whereby landlords are set to face penalties up to £30,000 if they are found £30,000 if they are found contravening housing law. The aim of this is to help protect residents' health and safety and well-being. I'm also pleased to report that Penny Button and Councillor Leslie Game gave a presentation to the LGA on social integration and cohesion, and that the LGA are now using this in their new cohesion guidance. This is a tremendous accolade for our community safety team. We're also setting up a Cabinet Advisory Group on Health and Wellbeing to advise on issues regarding the East Kent Hospital Trust and the effect of any change there on our residents. On a property front, we've negotiated the sale of freehold land to Margate Football Club, which will enable them to finance the development of the ground to ensure their sustainability as a successful football club well into the future. We've also facilitated the sale of the Ramsgate Sands, or is it Royal Sands, site to Blueberry Homes in order to guarantee the development of the site in the near future. It's also pleasing to note that almost £3 million has been realised this year from the sale of council properties which were surplus to requirements, and this money will help to fund other projects for the benefit of our residents. It wasn't in my report, and I do apologise to the other leaders, but I think it's also worth pointing out that Margate's been selected to host the Blue Flag Awards in May, which I think is a tremendous accolade for us, and it's richly deserved, probably because we've got more blue flags than most other places. As this is the last leaders' report of this council cycle, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the senior management team for the help and support they've given me and my cabinet over the past year. I would also like to record my appreciation of our hard-working staff for the service they give to the people of Thanet, making the best use of the diminishing resources that are at their disposal, whilst receiving very little thanks in return. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. I call upon Councillor Wells to comment on or ask questions in relationship to the Leaders' Report. And before you start, Councillor Wells, I've received your note and I was going to mention it at the end of the meeting because there are more than one reciprocant. Councillor Wells.
Thank you. As has become the custom, I suppose, with Councillor Bayford's reports, it's more about what he doesn't say than what he does say. And it is quite interesting to run through some elements of that report and look what was said, but what perhaps the counterbalance was in other areas. He makes great play of getting £250,000, £300,000 back from various government funds, but and refers to serious financial difficulties, but omits to mention it is the austerity decisions made by the Conservative governments of recent years that means we are looking at something like £6 million
Councillor Wells, I don't think we need to go into
£6
any
million
showboating and
less.
political statements. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, £6 million less in our budget, 22.5 million down to 16.5 next year because of that austerity policy. It is something that perhaps he could, in all honesty, have actually talked about as well. In exactly the same vein, I think you also have to remember that actually the battle for how that high street in Ramsgate and Margate was won was rather more fearsome than perhaps he gave reference to. And certainly I think members who were representing Ramsgate felt that they were disadvantaged in that battle from the very beginning. And we're very pleased that it came across and that Ramsgate is going to get something from this particular application. And that's actually very good to see. There's... and the opening paragraphs, all about Operation Brock and Brexit or whatever. I don't know about anybody else in this room, but I'll have to say that even us as anoraks get to the point, I suspect, where we're bored with this. God only knows what ordinary people in the street actually think of this particular mess. And it just behoves all of us to think very carefully about the logic behind some of the things that we actually undertake in the name of our residents. And for me, and there was a reference to Chairman's made today, the most significant omission from Councillor Bayford's report, and it was good to hear it actually dealt with because we had a bit of vintage Irish before you started, that actually both Councillor Bill Hayton and Councillor Iris Johnson are, I believe, standing down this time and are councillors of very long standing in this place, almost pillars of the institution. And I do think, given that we talked about giving members of the staff a round of applause and giving all sorts of other people a round of applause, both of them, and let it be said, I haven't always agreed with them. Is that right, Iris? I haven't always agreed with them, but both of them have actually given very long service to this council and to their residents, and I do think the leader perhaps should have mentioned that. But perhaps we could give them a round of applause, if no one else.
Councillor Bayford, you have the opportunity to respond if you wish.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And in response to the last bit, I think the agenda item says that I can report on things that have happened since our last meeting. Well, to my best of my knowledge, Councillor Mrs Johnson and Councillor Hayton haven't left yet, so it would have been a bit premature. And I've also got to say that as far as Councillor Johnson is concerned, I'm still waiting for the 3rd of April to make sure she really is going. But there we are. Well, I'm sure as it's election time, you were bound to make mention of the government. I'm not going to comment on that. I did say at the last meeting that you weren't at that unfortunately the Chancellor doesn't ring me, only the Secretary of State for Transport rings me and asks my views about things. But if the Chancellor had rang, then I'll pass your thoughts on, Councillor Wells. Don't worry about that. And as far as Ramsgate, I think it's a bit of a shame that you sort of have to be a bit bitter and twisted about the Ramsgate High Street Fund, because in fact we carried out a process and we got the result we got. It was carried out in an objective fashion. And I think credit has to go to Councillor Lynn Fairbrass, because she put up a very spirited, I won't say fight, because that's not the right way, although it has to be said that the meetings we had, I think it's fair to say, were robust. But then out of those kind of meetings you get the best decisions, and that's what happened. As far as people's, their patience as far as Brexit, I think you're right. I think it's running out. I think patience with politicians is running out. And my fear for this current election is that apathy will rule and the turnout will be very low. And I think that's a shame, because what happens here, whilst it's affected by what happens in Westminster, to local people, it's more important, and they should take an interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. I call upon Councillor Reverend Piper to comment on or ask questions in relationship to the Leader's report. Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps, Leader, one of the things we can do as a council, even in these last days of the lifespan of this one, is to actually communicate much more frequently and much better with the members of the public, then apathy really wouldn't be a problem. I feel absolutely certain about that. But thank you for your report, Leader. I'm sure everyone here shares your expressed concerns about the potential difficulties for this district if the government doesn't get its act together and deal with Brexit more maturely. Operation Brock cannot be seen as a long-term solution, and the government appears to be spending millions of pounds on short-term panic measures despite having had 2 years to make a plan. Perhaps they should have left local people with local knowledge to come up with a better local solution. True Redskins will be delighted that Ramsgate has been supported in the way it has to benefit from additional monies for the High Street Funds project, and again thanks to Councillor Lynn Fairbrass for her sterling efforts. Ramsgate councillors have often voiced concerns that we are the forgotten member of the Big Three in Thanet. I know I've done it myself from here several times. Fly tipping is a blight on our communities, and I would urge the new council to deal more robustly with offenders, including the disgusting leavings of various traveller communities who have blessed us with their presence on numerous occasions. How they expect local residents to make them feel welcome when they treat our open spaces as they do is totally beyond me. There are other encouraging reports in your report this evening, Leader. The LGA Social Integration and Cohesion Guidance, what a feather in the cap for them that is. The Cabinet Advisory Group on Health and Wellbeing, the long-awaited, imminent, we hope, development of the Royal Sands site, and the continuing growth of Margate Football Club. Leader, I realise that we're not paying for the feasibility study in respect of the Lido and Clifton baths, and welcome that news as good news. I'm sure many members were rather hoping for some details this evening about the promised feasibility study of Ramsgate Port. There is none, not even a start date. Instead, Leader, we are treated to public information which suggests not just repairs to berths 4 and 5, which is actually what was approved by this council. If you read the words carefully, it says repairs were approved. But not just repairs.
We're creeping into something that's irrelevant in association with the Leader's report, Councillor Piper.
Well,
you're responding to the Leader's report, and you're absolutely right, there was no mention of it, so I'll ask Councillor Bayford if he wishes to respond, but he's not obliged to. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't even have a start date for that. Instead, I don't recall any of the details of this development being shared with members, and just wondered whether they should have been. Can you confirm that this rather huge material change to the port will not in any way undermine the promised feasibility study to which this council is already committed?
We're carrying on, Councillor Piper, I'm sorry.
I'm finished with that point. It would be a wonderful legacy for this administration as it shuts down to be able to say to the people of Thanet, the feasibility study is on its way. Finally, can the council please issue a public statement about the works and the reasons for them, including the responsibility to pay for them and so on, because that information surely cannot be a secret, and it would help this council not to receive so many of the attacks it does in public places. Thank you.
I agree with the attacks, and
thank you.
I'll ask the Leader if he wishes to respond.
Right, well, let's address the feasibility study first. I couldn't have made it clearer. I don't know how many times this has come up. I've made it absolutely clear that this council is committed to carrying out a feasibility study. And if you remember, Councillor Piper, in response to your request, I did actually give an undertaking as far as I can, because there's nothing to say that after May the 2nd it will be me doing the talking. But if we are back here, you have a commitment that that feasibility study will be completed by the end of the year, and I think its completion is much more relevant than its start date. What I would say is, partly in response to what you said and partly in response to the noise that's been existing out there, that as far as I'm concerned, whatever's happening to the berth on the Brett's Quay has got nothing to do with the feasibility study, other than the fact that it will be recognised that it's there and its impact will be taken into account. What I would also point out to you is that, you know, there's a lot of fuss about this, This has actually been in the capital programme, I think, from memory, for about 4 years. I think it was put in by a previous administration of which you were a member. So the specification of it would have been down to you and your colleagues, Councillor Piper. So perhaps at some stage you'd like to tell the people of Thanet why it's in there. That would be very good, very useful. Taking to more positive things, you talk about our towns and, you know, our attempt to get money for Ramsgate. You talk about the big three. I've got to say that if a list of monies that come Broadstairs way was made, it would be really short. Really, really short. I mean, we sit back in awe at the complaints that come from Ramsgate and Margate about how hard done by they are, but that's another story. To finish on a very positive note, what I can do is to say that, you know, of course, the traveller situation has been a problem. It's been an ongoing one. We're very aware of it, and I do believe that, particularly thanks to the activities of Councillor Ashby, that we may have some solutions on the horizon. More news on this later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. I now call upon Councillor Matterface to comment on or ask questions in relationship to the Leader's Report. Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. I promise I'm not going to ask too many questions because I'm still waiting for answers to some of the questions I put to you in December the 6th. So I can't hang around waiting for the answers because I won't be standing in May. Regarding the lorry park, could you give us some update of how plans are progressing to keep Thanet accessible? Because we've discussed tourism. We know how important tourism is. And when Operation Brock was in place before, we know it had a major impact on accessibility to Thanet. We're getting 171,000 from the government, and I assume this will be used in part for that, but perhaps Mr. Waite can enlighten us on that. We've already had references to litter. My own personal observation is that we do have bins, which is great, but they're not emptied often enough, particularly in my local park. And also, I think it's crucial that our roads and pavements are swept occasionally. There are areas of Thanet that are extremely windy, and I get people telling me that the red bag that's put out is often material is blown out of it and drifts off down the road. I noted with interest the reference to the social cohesion event that Councillor Game and Penny Button went to, because I was involved with an extremely informative session that took place at the GAP project in Broadstairs with a researcher working on exactly this theme, and I am awaiting the final report from her. It was a cross-religion, cross-faith group, and it was extremely informative, and everybody spoke very highly of Thanet, but they did appreciate there were issues that needed looking at. I'm disappointed, and I know I'm commenting, but I'm disappointed you've made no reference to the bus service cuts that are about to be introduced on the 7th of April. Both your ward and my ward leader are going to be severely affected by the change from 2 buses an hour to 1 bus an hour. And the 1 bus an hour will no longer serve Broadstairs Station, Broadstairs Library or the Broadway Medical Centre, because it will be taking a completely different route. And there are also residents in other parts of Broadstairs, at Bradstow, Viking and St Peters, whose bus service is going to be reduced to virtually nothing. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to become very isolated and unable to access our town centres or other parts of Thanet.
Councillor Matterface, interesting information. I listened and took it all in, but can we get back to the Leader's Report, please?
Well, it links in with the social cohesion, because people can't get out and about. There's not much social cohesion going on. But I'm going to end now, you'll be pleased to hear. But I'd like to thank everybody in the Chamber, the officers and fellow councillors who have been extremely helpful and have worked together with us over the last 4 years. And I wish everybody who is standing again, who's sitting in this chamber, all the best in the election. And as they say, by the best man and woman win. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matterface. Councillor Bayford, response?
Yeah, Chairman, I mean, I think most of that really doesn't require comment from me, particularly as most of it referred to matters outside our hands, particularly the bus services. I agree with you, but, you know, it's not a district function, so I don't feel that it's right for me to be commenting on that. What I would say, as far as the litter is concerned, again, that we are just about to deploy 75 smart bins. For people who don't know what they are, they're big bins. They've got technology inside, and they actually signal when they're reaching fullness. Now, big benefit of that is that if it works properly, they get emptied before they overflow. But perhaps just as importantly, they don't get emptied when they're empty. Because under the current system, you know, the bin men go around and they empty all the bins whether there's stuff in them or not. So there we are. But I agree with you in your comments about people that are moving on and so on. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. We'll move on, shall we? Agenda item 10, annual report of the Chairman of the Executive Policy and Community Safety Scrutiny Panel. I call upon Councillor Glenn Coleman-Cook to present his report. Councillor Coleman-Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the members of the Executive Scrutiny Panel for their contributions to the work of the panel throughout the year, and the Cabinet for accepting the various invitations to our meetings and to responding to questions from members. The most significant review carried out by the panel was the reviewing of the proposed draft local development plan upon invitation to consider the Cabinet proposals for the new plan. I was pleased, and I think so with the other panel members, when some of our recommendations were endorsed by Cabinet and full Council, as detailed in the report before you. I look forward to the final outcome after all the consultations have been done. The panel also made suggestions to the Council, such as continuing supporting local museums, and Cabinet affirmed that they would take note of our recommendations if they decide to proceed with marketing the Council properties in question. We also received a very informative presentation on the work of operational services. It was especially pleasing to note the hard work put into the various aspects of the service by officers, particularly in enforcement. We reviewed the impact of the new Public Spaces Protection Order that was applied to some wards in Margate and Ramsgate. Although we did not get the full picture of the effectiveness of the order, the exercise was worthwhile, as this informed members on how this was panning out. Additional reviews will be required, and a final review of this order will be undertaken once the implementation period has ended. Finally, I'd like to report the panel also called in the executive decision on digital parking because it did not provide sufficient information to support the decision made. However, after some debate that involved the leader standing in for the portfolio holder, the panel was satisfied with the additional information provided and no further action was required. In conclusion, I'd like to thank all the officers who provided support to the work of the panel throughout the year. It was my pleasure to be part of this committee, and I'm grateful for the opportunity I had to serve as its chairman. And may I now invite members to comment on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Any questions or comments? In that case, thank you again. We can move on to agenda item 11, which is the annual report of the Chairman of the Finance, Budget and Performance Scrutiny Panel. I call upon Councillor Linda Piper to present her report. Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, before I briefly outline the work done by this panel since its inception, I would like to thank Mr Charles Hungway, Nick Hughes and the team who have worked so hard to support us and deliver the presentations we have sought. This report tonight is a summary of our activities on your behalf. It notes Cabinet member presentations as well as officer presentations to the panel. It has been a pleasure to hear from members regarding issues such as the Port of Ramsgate, fees and charges in the forward plan, as well as questions concerning temporary accommodation and homeless households. It is widely accepted that the rollout of universal credit has not gone as smoothly as was originally intended and is having an adverse impact on households' ability to pay rent. As the report highlights, against these challenges, the homelessness team have prevented 213 households from becoming homeless to the period ending September 2018, compared to 92 in the same period during 2017. There is no doubt that the demand for housing and homelessness intervention is rising, and our team deserve our congratulations for all their efforts. More details about the committee's role are noted in Annex 1 on pages 40 and 41. Members, it has been a privilege and a pleasure to serve as chairman of this committee, and I commend this report to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Piper. Councillor Johnson, did I see your hand go up?
I'm delighted. You saw my hand going up. Thank you. Thank you for everybody for your kind applause earlier on. But I have a question on your report, Councillor. Under 2, Cabinet Member presentations at panel meetings, under a point about presentation on Ramsgate Port and Harbour, the leader promised you that evening under 2.2, in concluding the debate, the Leader of Council committed to finding a way to improve the operations of the port and would also be improving the communication of messages relating to the port and harbour. Did he tell you that evening that Mr Grayling had never even contacted Seabourn or, in fact, the Arklow Company? By the way, I went to school with the families from Arklow, the Kierans and the Tyrrells, so I know a little bit about the background to all of this. Did the leader tell you that Mr Grayling had never even contacted those companies?
No.
Vintage, boys.
Councillor Piper, are you able to respond?
No, I was not told by the leader that Ms Grayling hadn't contacted us. I think perhaps this question would be better dealt with by the leader than myself.
I think it's very hot news that became public today even, didn't it? So, well read, Councillor Johnson. Can we move on? Thank you. Agenda item 12, Annual Report of the Chairman of the Governance and Audit Committee. I call upon Councillor Day to present his report. Councillor Day.
Thank you. On an annual basis, the Governance and Audit Committee go through a self-assessment process to understand its performance against its terms of reference. This information then feeds into the annual report, which is before you all this evening. The annual report provides details of attendance at meetings and reports considered by the committee and the outcome of the self-assessment. It also identifies any future challenges for the committee and actions to improve its effectiveness. I therefore propose that members note the content of the annual report and actions within the action plan. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the members of the Governance and Audit Committee for their contribution and also thank the officers who have supported the work of the committee throughout the municipal year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Questions, comments? In that case, we can move on to agenda item 13, which is the annual report of the independent chairman of the Standards Committee. I call upon Dr Sexton to present his report. Dr Sexton, could you please make your way to the top table? Thank you. Dr Sexton.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will have read the report and reflected on its contents. I therefore am not intending to present it or go into any further detail. I invite any questions, should there be any, but otherwise invite you to note the contents of this report for this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you to Dr Sexton for the work that he's done for many years now for this council. Mr Chairman, I note paragraph 4.3 on page 69 of this agenda item, and in particular take note of the suggestion of a significant delay in the performance of the committee's duties if council fails to appoint this evening. So I'd like your permission to speak when we get to the next item agenda, because I think it refers to Dr Sexton's position.
Thank you. I don't think that's appropriate at this point because we move on to agenda item 14. Thank you, Dr Sexton. Agenda item 14, appointment of independent members of the Standards Committee and independent persons. I move that the Council approve the appointment of Dr Sexton as an independent member of the Standards Committee until the 2020 Annual Council meeting. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Sorry, Councillor Piper. Can I hold that question back?
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Piper.
Thank you, Chairman. I was a bit quick on my feet earlier. My apologies. Perhaps I should repeat. I note paragraph 4.3 on page 69 and take note of the suggestion of a significant delay in the performance of the committee's duties if Council fails to appoint this evening. I'd like to challenge that assertion and offer a better way forward. Mr Chairman, I've done a little research and discovered that during the lifetime of this Council session, just about 4 years, 41% of all the Standards Committee meetings have been cancelled. That's almost half. Ergo, the committee is actually not that busy, which might prompt a question, do we really need it? Elected members are the only people who have to abide by the set standards of behaviour on that committee, and it seems bizarre to me that neither officers nor even the independently appointed persons come under the remit of the very committee that they run. I would suggest that instead of focusing entirely on the behaviour of members, the committee should also scrutinise, when necessary, any officer behaviour which may be questioned, even and especially to exonerate them at times if necessary.
Councillor Piper, Officer Tim Howes would like to intervene.
Can Mr Howes respond when I've finished? Then he'll know what I'm going to say. Otherwise he's guessing.
Thank you, Chairman. The first point I'd make is that whilst the Standards Committee has not met as often as it could have done, it only met when there was relevant business. The main part of its business is, of course, dealing with complaints against councillors in the hearing subcommittees and hearing assessment subcommittees, and dealing with investigations. That's the principal part of its work, and those reports and the results of that work is reported to the Standards Committee in any event. In terms of law, the committee can only deal with complaints against members, and that's what it's there for. It was set up under the Localism Act for that particular purpose. It has no power to deal with complaints against officers, and nor should it, because officers are bound by contracts of employment with their own rules about discipline and performance. And it would be wholly inappropriate for members to get involved in that process at that stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Chairman?
Is it appropriate? I've got Councillor Johnson wants to speak and Councillor Hayton. Can you sum up?
I can sum up.
Quickly.
Thank you for that additional information. You guessed well. Rather than appoint posts this evening, I would like to propose that this vote is delayed until the summer to give the incoming members of the new council an opportunity to have a meaningful vote on the interested candidates, having first reviewed the suggested officer submissions. This would give them plenty of time. By delaying the appointment until the summer, Mr Chairman, the committee will only have missed one meeting, and there's half a chance, well, 41% chance, that meeting will be cancelled anyway. So I'd like to make that proposal, Mr Chairman, that we delay the vote until the summer, when we can have a meaningful vote involving the new members of this chamber.
Mr Howes to comment. I will get to Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hayton, but Mr Howes first.
Oh, sorry.
I think there are two issues. The first thing is the work of the Standards Committee is ongoing. There are already complaints in train and currently under potential investigation, and therefore to have no committee at all would mean we couldn't actually carry out any standards work during that time. And I think that would be in breach of the Localism Act to do that. Second issue is, your proposal does seem to be a direct opposite of what's being proposed, and therefore you could achieve the same result by voting against the appointment.
Councillor Johnson, you were next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Actually, there is a whole recommendation here, 1 to 4. It was kind of implied in your words that it was just Dr Sexton and Mrs Bacon, but in fact there are 4 names here, and so I would like to support the recommendation very much for the reasons Mr Howes gave. An awful lot of the work that we do on standards, those of us who are on various panels and volunteer to be on panels, is way outside what you would know as normal meetings. Standards meetings have been cancelled, that's for sure, but there's an awful lot of this work that we do. I know that Councillor McTomlinson and I are often on panels, and we have to be so independent-minded, particularly if it's someone of our own political persuasion. I'm grateful to Dr Sexton, Mrs Bacon and Mr James and Mr Tucker and all who come to our meetings and all who support us. I wouldn't always agree with everything, but it is a very difficult task, and as I say, when you go in that door to make decisions on really your colleagues, it is often one where you really have to have a total conscience on what you do. So I'm actually supporting the recommendation. You can't be without these lead people in these meetings. Work in this council continues whether we're here or not, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hayton.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you all for your kind regards to my leaving. I'm sure you're quite happy for me to leave about time. Yes, Chairman, I was a former member of the Independent Committee. It's a small committee, but it's worthwhile remembering there's not just standards that it's the constitutional part of this council. And in my time, there was lots of changes to the constitution that was brought to this full council. And quite frankly, to do away with an independent, and I can certainly say the 2 independent members fulfilled their duty to the nth degree. And quite frankly, I thank them also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayton. And Councillor Johnson's absolutely right. There are more than one name within this agenda item. So I've moved with regards to Dr Sexton. Vice Chair has seconded, so I'll now ask again, do members agree? Do you want a show of hands on that, Councillor Piper? In that case, all those members that agree with the appointment, please show hands now. I think, well, if I can, okay, in that case, this is to approve the appointment of Dr Sexton as an independent member of the Standards Committee until the 2020 annual council meeting. All those members that agree to approve and appoint Dr Sexton.
Yes, we're doing each of them individually.
I'm doing them individually.
If I may say so, I think, you know, we all have lots of issues with the Independent Standards Committee or not, but I do think it's invidious to separate the 4 members of the committee in this individual way. And I do think that first, if I was in your shoes, I'd be putting it as a whole first. And if that fails, then you can go back to the other. I think, you know, realistically, you should put it as a whole first.
I'll get Mr Howes to explain, but I do have individual questions in my hand, and each one, I'm told, has to be appointed individually. Councillor, Mr Howes.
That's quite right, Chairman, and we are also in the middle of a vote anyway, so yes, you have started that process.
So, can I do it again? All those... I don't think there's... I think a show of hands, Councillor Johnson. If I do it on one, I'll have to do it on all 4. So, show of hands to approve the appointment of Dr Sexton as an independent member of the Standards Committee until the 2020 annual council meeting. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? That's carried, and Dr. Sexton is approved to the appointment independent member. I move on to the next item in my list on my script, as people know that I do receive a script, and that is, I move that the Council approve the appointment of Mrs Bacon as an independent member of the Standards Committee until the 2020 annual Council meeting. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. Do members want to vote on this, or do members agree? Thank you. I move on. I move that the Council approve the appointment of Mr James as independent person until the 2020 annual Council meeting. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Finally, on this item, I move that the Council approve the appointment of Mr Tucker as Deputy Independent Person until the 2020 annual Council meeting. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. Agenda item 15, constitutional change, mandatory training. I move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. Of course, we're agreeing for the new council, of course. Councillor Matterface.
I just want to give, as a member of the member training group since it was set up, and we have had one or two changes due to various circumstances, but I would like to thank the councillors who served on that members training group, and also Mr Hughes and Mr Clapson, who have been excellent clerical, kept us on our toes. And it was a pleasure to be on a committee that was informal, but where everybody's views were taken into account. So I just like that recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matterface. Agenda item 16, the calendar of meetings. I move that the recommendation as set out in the report be adopted. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. Agenda item 17, members' allowances. This is a report back from the EKJIRP committee. I move that the report be noted. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. Agenda item 18, Ramsgate Charities nominations. I move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Do members agree? Thank you. And finally, on the agendas, agenda item 19, change of polling places for the 2019 district elections. Would members please note that this report is for information only? Thank you very much. And before I wipe, Councillor Matterface.
Yes, I would like it recorded that I have been in touch with the Chief Executive and I am aware of the history behind this, but I would like it recorded that I'm very disappointed that the only polling station in Beacon Road Ward is going to be at the easternmost part of the ward, which is quite a walk for people who live on the westernmost part of the ward. I appreciate the circumstances. The council had very little notice that the church that was being used, it was closed, and I also appreciate that efforts were made to find an alternative. But I would like an assurance that if we do have a snap general election, or we even have EU elections, or even a by-election, who knows, that a second polling station will be sought, even if it's just a tent on Westover Gardens Green. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that very subject, I would personally like to apologise in some respects to the residents of my ward, Viking Ward. Unfortunately, Broadstairs and St Peter's Town Council are doing extensive refurbishment work at Piermont Hall, which means that the polling station for that area of the Viking Ward has now been moved to Queen's Road, and I've already received a number of comments with regards to the lack of parking, but hopefully people will be able to exercise and get some benefit from it. Before we close the meeting, I would personally, and I would ask all members to acknowledge the sterling work that has been carried out by particularly Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hayton. I have to say that Councillor Hayton, for Councillor Maeve Saunders and myself, was a mentor when we first entered into local politics, and I served alongside Councillor Hayton in Bradstow Ward for a term, and found it very educational, and met with him on many occasions when he was chairman of Kent County Council, and we were both surrounded with bling. My bling was slightly better than his as Mayor of Broadstairs and St Peter's. And Councillor Johnson, who has shown me in many respects how to work and work well within your elected ward. But I'd also like to say to all members who are not standing next time, thank you for the sterling work that you've done over the last 4 years. And for those that are standing, let's have, as they say, a clean, well functioned local election. And hopefully, I'll see many of you, not necessarily sitting in this chair, once we reform after the election. Thank you very much. Thank you. Here endeth the lesson, and here endeth the meeting. Thank you very much.